The crowd's jeers drowned out Bella Foster's strangled cry as the whip cracked across her back for the third time. Genoa, Nevada Territory, 1870, a town that had once represented hope now bore witness to her public shame under the merciless midday sun. Her crime: allegedly stealing food from the general store, owned by the town's most influential man, when in truth she had only been trying to return money mistakenly given as change. "That's enough." The voice cut through the crowd's bloodthirsty murmurs, powerful as a gunshot. Dust swirled as a tall figure pushed through the gathering of onlookers, his spurs jingling with each determined step toward the wooden post where Bella stood bound, her calico dress already torn and stained crimson. Sheriff Wilson paused with the whip raised, his weathered face twisting into a scowl. "This ain't your concern, Hayes. Justice is being served here." Hayes Young removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and eyes that had seen too much of the frontier's harsh realities. "This isn't justice. It's a spectacle, and I'm ending it." His hand moved to rest on his holstered Colt, not a threat but a promise. The crowd fell silent. Hayes Young wasn't known for idle words. In the 3 months since he'd arrived in Genoa, he'd established himself as a man who stood by his convictions. A cattle driver who kept to himself but never shied away from what was right. Sheriff Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Judge Thornton ordered 10 lashes. We're only on the 3rd. "Then consider the debt paid," Hayes replied, stepping forward and pulling a leather pouch from his vest. He tossed it at the sheriff's feet, coins spilling onto the packed dirt. "That covers whatever she supposedly stole and more. You can't buy your way out of the law, Young." Hayes took another step forward. "And you can't hide corruption behind a badge, Wilson. Everyone knows Thornton only rules in Porter's favor." His gaze swept the crowd, finding guilty faces turning away. "Is this what Genoa stands for now? Whipping a woman in the town square while you all watch?" Bella's legs trembled beneath her, shame and pain overwhelming her senses. She barely registered the heated exchange happening behind her, focusing instead on staying conscious. Blood trickled down her spine, warm against her chilled skin. "Cut her down," Hayes demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. For a tense moment, it seemed the sheriff might refuse. But something in Hayes's stance, or perhaps the way several men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, made him reconsider. With a disgusted grunt, Wilson nodded to his deputy. As soon as her hands were free, Bella collapsed. She would have hit the ground if not for Hayes moving swiftly to catch her. Without a word, he swept her into his arms, one hand supporting her back carefully to avoid the fresh wounds. "This ain't finished, Young," Sheriff Wilson called after him. Hayes didn't bother turning around. "Yes, it is." He carried Bella through the parting crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed them down the main street. Bella fought to stay conscious, her face pressed against a shirt that smelled of leather, horse, and the open range. "Why?" She managed to whisper. "Questions later," he replied, his voice gentler than she expected from a man of his stature. "Let's get you tended to first." Hayes carried her to the livery stable at the edge of town where his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, was waiting. With careful movements, he lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her, one strong arm securing her against his chest. "I don't even know you," Bella murmured as they rode out of town, the pain in her back making every word an effort. "Hayes Young," he replied simply. "And you're Bella Foster, the seamstress who opened shop last winter." When she turned her head slightly in surprise, he added, "Small town. People talk." They rode for nearly an hour, leaving Genoa behind and heading into the pine-covered foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The journey was excruciating for Bella, each hoofbeat sending waves of pain through her lacerated back. but she bit her lip and endured. Eventually, they approached a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, sheltered by tall pines. A creek bubbled nearby, and a thin wisp of smoke rose from the stone chimney. "My place," Hayes explained as he dismounted and gently helped her down. "Not much, but it's private. Nobody will bother you here." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean: one main room with a fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and a few shelves stocked with provisions. A rifle stood beside the door, and various tools hung from hooks on the walls. "Sit here," he instructed, guiding her to one of the chairs, positioning it so she could lean forward against the table without putting pressure on her back. "I need to look at those wounds." Bella stiffened. "I can't. I'll be respectful," Hayes assured her. "But those lashes need cleaning or they'll fester. I've seen it before." His eyes clouded momentarily with some distant memory. "I won't look at anything I shouldn't." After a hesitant moment, Bella nodded. Her reputation was already in tatters. What did modesty matter now? Hayes moved carefully, using a knife to cut the blood-soaked fabric away from the wounds without pulling it from the already drying blood. He worked in silence, heating water and adding some kind of herb that filled the cabin with a pungent aroma. When he finally began cleaning the wounds, his touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused and strong. "You've done this before," Bella observed through gritted teeth as he dabbed at the torn flesh. "Army surgeon taught me during the war," he replied. "Was with the Union cavalry. Saw too many men die from infections that could have been prevented." The mention of the war explained the distant look she sometimes caught in his eyes, the same look many veterans carried. 5 years since Appomattox, but the wounds ran deeper than any battle scar. "Why did you help me?" Bella asked as he applied a salve that cooled the burning sensation across her back. Hayes was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Because it wasn't right, and I've seen enough wrong in this world without standing by while more happens. But you don't know me. You don't know if I'm guilty." "Are you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No." Tears welled in her eyes. "Mr. Porter gave me too much change. I was returning it when his wife accused me of stealing, but they've never liked me because She hesitated. "Because you don't cater exclusively to the wealthy wives in town," Hayes finished for her. "You make dresses for the saloon girls, too." Bella turned slightly, wincing at the movement. "How did you know that?" "Like I said, people talk, and I listen." He finished bandaging her back with strips of clean cloth. "There. That should help for now, but you'll need to rest." "I can't stay here," she protested weakly. "It's not proper." Hayes almost smiled. "I think propriety left the conversation when you were publicly whipped in the town square. But if it eases your mind, I'll sleep by the fire. You take the bed." Exhaustion finally overcame Bella's pain and anxiety. She allowed Hayes to help her to the bed, where she lay on her stomach, her back throbbing despite his careful treatment. As consciousness slipped away, she heard him moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night. "Thank you," she whispered. If he responded, she didn't hear it, already drifting into an uneasy sleep filled with nightmares of jeering faces and the crack of a whip. Bella awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disoriented and groggy, she forgot where she was. Then the pain in her back reminded her with cruel clarity. Hayes sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up when she stirred. "There's coffee if you want it, and some corn bread from yesterday." "What time is it?" Her mouth felt dry, her voice hoarse. "Little past noon. You needed the rest." He set down his knife and wood, pouring her a cup of coffee. "How's the back feeling?" "Like I was trampled by horses," she admitted, carefully pushing herself up. Every movement sent fire across her shoulders, but the intense, sharp pain of yesterday had dulled to a persistent throb. Better than yesterday, then. There was no humor in his voice, just simple assessment. I need to change those bandages soon. Bella nodded, accepting the coffee cup with shaking hands. The cabin looked different in daylight, more lived in than she'd noticed the previous evening. Books stacked on a small shelf caught her eye, not something she expected in a cowboy's home. "You read," she observed. Hayes followed her gaze. "When there's time. Winter evenings get long out here. How long have you had this place?" "Bought it 3 months ago when I decided to stay in the area." He returned to his whittling. "Was just passing through originally." Bella sipped her coffee, studying him. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, early 30s perhaps, his face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble of his beard. His hands moved with precision as he carved, revealing a patience that seemed at odds with his powerful build. "What will happen now?" she finally asked. Hayes set down his carving, a small horse taking shape under his knife. "Depends. Porter and the sheriff won't let this go easily." "Your reputation in town is ruined," she finished flatly. "I know you could leave, start fresh somewhere else." The thought had already occurred to her. "With what?" "Everything I own is in my shop, all my fabrics, my sewing machine, that's my livelihood." Hayes nodded, understanding the dilemma. "We could go back for your things, tonight when the town's quiet. The word hung between them, "unless you'd rather go alone." Bella stared into her coffee cup. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Young, truly?" He set down his knife again, meeting her gaze directly. "Hayes, and I told you why. You said it wasn't right. But men see injustice every day and walk past it. What makes me different?" Something flashed in his eyes, a memory or emotion she couldn't identify. "Maybe I'm tired of walking past." He stood abruptly. "I need to check the horses. Rest while you can. We'll change those bandages after." Outside, Hayes leaned against the corral fence, watching his horses graze. The truth was more complicated than he'd admitted. Something about Bella Foster had caught his attention long before yesterday's spectacle, perhaps the dignity with which she carried herself in a town that barely tolerated her independence, or the kindness she showed to women others shunned. He'd noticed her, watched her from a distance, admired her quiet determination. But their paths had never crossed directly until yesterday, when something in him snapped at the sight of her bound to that post, her back exposed to the lash. He couldn't explain the fury that had risen in him, a cold, focused rage he hadn't felt since the war. All he knew was that he couldn't stand by and watch, not again. Not after Sarah. Hayes shook his head, pushing away memories of another woman he'd failed to protect. This wasn't about redemption. It was about doing what was right, here and now. Back inside, he found Bella attempting to stand, one hand braced against the wall for support. "You shouldn't be up yet," he admonished, moving quickly to her side. "I can't lie around all day," she insisted, though her pale face betrayed how much the effort cost her. "I need to start thinking about what comes next." Hayes recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew argument would be futile. Instead, he offered his arm for support. "At least let me help." They spent the afternoon making plans. Bella was determined to retrieve her sewing machine and fabrics from her shop investments that had taken years of saving to acquire. Hayes suggested they wait until after midnight, when even the saloons would be quieting down. "Porter has influence with the sheriff, but he doesn't own the law completely," Hayes explained as he changed her bandages. His touch remained clinical and respectful, but Bella was increasingly aware of his proximity, the gentle strength in his hands. "The law didn't seem concerned with justice yesterday," she pointed out. wincing as he applied fresh salve to her wounds. "Sheriff Wilson is weak, not evil. He follows whoever shouts loudest or pays best." Hayes secured the clean bandages. "But he's also lazy. He won't expect us to return so soon." "And if he does?" Hayes's expression hardened. "Then I'll deal with him." The quiet certainty in his voice sent a shiver through Bella that had nothing to do with her injuries. This man was dangerous. When crossed, she could see it in the set of his shoulders, the controlled precision of his movements. Yet she felt safer with him than she had in years. As dusk approached, Hayes prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and more corn bread. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in thought about the night ahead. "Tell me about your shop," Hayes said eventually. "How did you end up in Genoa?" Bella traced the grain of the wooden table with her finger. "I came west after my parents died of fever back in Missouri. I had an aunt in Virginia City who taught me sewing, but she passed 2 years ago. Genoa seemed quieter, more respectable." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "I was wrong about that." "And no husband?" Hayes asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "That's not my business." "No, it's a fair question." Bella sipped her coffee. "I was engaged once before the war. James went to fight for the Union and never came home after that." She shrugged carefully, mindful of her back. "I decided I preferred independence to marriage for convenience's sake." Hayes nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Independence comes at a cost, especially for a woman." "It does," she agreed, "but it's worth it, or it was until yesterday." "It still is," Hayes said firmly. "What happened yesterday wasn't about your independence. It was about Porter's power and his wife's spite." Darkness fell early, the cabin growing dim except for the firelight. Hayes lit a lamp and continued whittling while Bella dozed in the chair, saving her strength for the night ahead. When he gently shook her awake near midnight, she found he had prepared a dark shirt and trousers for her. "They'll be too big, but easier to move in than a dress with your back the way it is," he explained, turning away to give her privacy. The men's clothing felt strange but practical. Hayes helped her adjust the suspenders, his fingers careful to avoid her wounds. She caught him looking at her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He cleared his throat. "Nothing. We should go." But something had shifted between them, a current of awareness that hadn't been there before. They rode double on Hayes's gelding, taking a roundabout path to avoid the main road into town. Genoa was mostly dark when they arrived, only a few lights still burning in the saloon windows. Hayes tied the horse in an alley behind Bella's small shop and helped her dismount. "You have a key," he whispered. She shook her head. "It's inside. I always left through the front door." Hayes examined the back door, then produced a thin metal tool from his pocket. Bella raised an eyebrow. "Army scout," he explained with a hint of a smile. "Useful skills." The lock yielded quickly to his manipulation. Inside, the shop was dark and still, smelling of fabric and beeswax. Moonlight filtered through the front windows, illuminating the Singer sewing machine on a table by the window, Bella's pride and possession. "We'll need to work quickly," Hayes murmured. "What's essential?" Bella moved through the familiar space, gathering her scissors, patterns, and the specialized tools of her trade. Hayes found a trunk and began carefully packing bolts of fabric, while Bella sorted through her personal belongings from the small room behind the shop where she had lived. They worked in efficient silence, both aware of the risk they were taking. When the trunk was full, Hayes secured it with leather straps. "The sewing machine is too heavy to carry far," he whispered. "I'll bring the horse around to the back." He slipped out into the alley while Bella continued gathering small items. She was just retrieving a hidden pouch of coins from beneath a floorboard when a voice froze her in place. Well, the thief returns to steal more." Bella turned slowly to find Mrs. Porter standing in the doorway between the shop and living quarters, a small pistol in her hand. The woman's thin face was set in lines of triumph. "I'm taking what's rightfully mine," Bella said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Nothing here is yours anymore, Mrs. Porter replied with cold satisfaction. "My husband purchased this building yesterday. You're trespassing." Anger flared in Bella, temporarily overwhelming her fear. "He had no right. I paid my rent through the month." "Rights?" Mrs. Porter laughed. "You forfeited your rights when you tried to corrupt this town with your loose morals. Making clothes for whores, encouraging decent women to dress like harlots." Bella realized the woman was serious in her twisted mind. A seamstress who served all customers without judgment was somehow a threat to public decency. The realization would have been laughable if not for the gun pointed at her chest. "Mrs. Porter," she began carefully, "please lower the back door opened and Hayes stepped in." Mrs. Porter swung around, startled, and the gun went off with a deafening crack in the confined space. Hayes staggered back, clutching his upper arm. Blood immediately darkened his shirt sleeve. "Hayes." Bella moved toward him instinctively, but Mrs. Porter turned the gun back toward her. "Don't move, either of you." The woman's hand trembled, her eyes wild with fear and righteous indignation. "I'll shoot again." "Madam," Hayes said, his voice tight with pain but controlled, "you don't want to do this. Put the gun down before someone else gets hurt." "You're trespassing," she insisted. "I have every right to protect my husband's property." Footsteps pounded outside the gunshot had attracted attention. Bella saw their carefully laid plan unraveling. If they were caught here, Hayes would face charges far more serious than her own. "Mrs. Porter," Bella said, trying a different approach, "think about what you're doing. Is this how a Christian woman behaves, shooting an unarmed man?" The mention of Christian virtue made the older woman blink. Her grip on the pistol loosened slightly. In that moment of hesitation, Hayes moved with surprising speed for a wounded man. He lunged forward, grabbing Mrs. Porter's wrist and forcing it upward. The gun went off again, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as he wrenched the weapon from her grasp. The woman screamed, more in outrage than pain. Outside, voices called out, moving closer. "We need to go. Now." Hayes tucked the pistol into his belt and grabbed the trunk with his good arm. "Get the sewing machine." Bella hesitated only a moment before lifting her precious singer. Together they hurried out the back door to where Hayes's horse waited. They had just secured the trunk and machine to the saddle when Sheriff Wilson's voice rang out from the front of the shop. "Around back. Check the alley." Hayes boosted Bella onto the horse, then swung up behind her despite his wounded arm. They galloped down the alley just as deputies rounded the corner of the building. Shouts followed them, but Hayes urged the horse faster, racing through Genoa's darkened streets toward the foothills. They didn't slow until they were well away from town, the lights of Genoa just distant pinpricks behind them. Hayes's breathing had grown labored, his body tense against Bella's back. "You're hurt," she said, twisting to look at him in the moonlight. His face was pale, his jaw clenched against pain. "I'll be fine," he replied. "Bullet just grazed me." But when they finally reached the cabin and dismounted, his shirt sleeve was soaked with blood. Bella insisted on examining the wound, guiding him to sit at the table while she lit lamps. "Now I'm the one doing the doctoring," she said, cutting away his sleeve to reveal a deep furrow across his upper arm. "This is more than a graze, Hayes." He watched her as she cleaned the wound, using the same supplies he'd used on her back. "You've done this before, too." "My father was a doctor," she explained, pressing a clean cloth against the wound to stem the bleeding. "I assisted him sometimes." When the bleeding had slowed, she stitched the wound closed with neat, precise movements, using a needle and silk thread from her sewing supplies. Hayes barely flinched, watching her work with something like admiration. "You have steady hands," he observed. "Comes with the profession." She tied off the final stitch and began bandaging his arm. "Though I usually work with fabric, not flesh. Either way, you're good at it." Their eyes met, and that awareness flickered between them again, stronger now, impossible to ignore. Bella looked away first, focusing on securing the bandage. "We can't go back to town," Hayes said after a moment. "Not after tonight," Bella nodded. "I know, Mrs. Porter will have told everyone we attacked her. It won't matter what the truth is." "I have some savings," he said. "Enough to get us to California, maybe start fresh there." The casual "us" hung in the air between them. Bella finished tying the bandage and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "You don't owe me anything, Hayes. You've risked enough already." He stood, wincing slightly at the movement, but his eyes never left hers. "This isn't about owing. You must know that by now." "Then what is it about?" she asked softly. Instead of answering, he reached out with his good arm, his hand gently cupping her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than clinical necessity, and the warmth of his palm against her skin sent a tremor through her. "I've watched you for months," he admitted. "The way you hold your head high despite the whispers, the kindness you show to women others shun, your determination to make your own way." Bella's heart beat faster. "You never spoke to me." "I had nothing to offer but a half-built life." "Still don't, really." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "But when I saw you yesterday tied to that post, something broke in me. I couldn't stand by and watch, not again." "Not again," she echoed. Pain flickered across his face, old wounds that had nothing to do with his arm. "I had a sister, Sarah, back in Missouri during the war. Bushwhackers came through our town. They accused her of helping Union soldiers." His voice grew distant. "I was away fighting. Wasn't there to protect her when they dragged her into the town square." Understanding dawned in Bella's eyes. "Hayes, I'm so sorry. When I saw you there." His voice roughened. "It wasn't just about you, but then I brought you here and it became about you. Only you." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Bella placed her hand over his where it still rested against her cheek. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "Everything I planned, everything I worked for. We figure it out together," Hayes said simply. "If that's what you want." Instead of answering, Bella rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Hayes responded, his arm encircling her waist with careful pressure, mindful of her injured back. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Bella saw something in his eyes she'd never expected to find again after James died: hope, and the beginning of something that might become love. "California sounds promising," she said with a small smile. Hayes returned her smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. "We'll leave at first light." They spent the night making preparations, neither willing to risk sleep when pursuit from town remained a possibility. Hayes tended to his horses and packed provisions while Bella sorted through her rescued belongings, setting aside what they could reasonably carry. By dawn, they were ready. Hayes had a second horse, a sturdy mare he used as a pack horse on longer journeys. They divided their belongings between the animals, securing Bella's precious sewing machine carefully. As the first rays of sunlight crested the Sierra Nevada, they took one last look at the cabin. "Will you miss it?" Bella asked. Hayes considered the small structure, the first place he'd called his own since before the war. It was just a stopping place, he decided, not a home. They mounted their horses and set out westward, following a trail that would eventually connect with the main road to California. Hayes kept them off the regular paths when possible, wary of pursuit from Genoa. Their journey was not easy. Bella's back still pained her, especially after hours in the saddle, and Hayes's wounded arm limited his strength. But they established a rhythm, supporting each other when needed, finding moments of unexpected joy in their shared adventure. On their third night, camped in a sheltered hollow with a small fire for warmth, Bella asked the question that had been on her mind since they left. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Hayes poked at the fire, sending sparks into the night sky. "Porter might push for it initially, but pursuing us across territorial lines would cost more than he'd gain. Most likely they'll spin a tale about running us out of town and consider it victory enough. And if they do come, then we'll handle it." He looked up at her. "But I don't think they will. Men like Porter and Wilson are bullies. They prey on those they perceive as weak or alone. You're neither anymore." The simple statement warmed her more than the fire. In the flickering light, Hayes looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened. Bella moved to sit beside him, leaning carefully against his good shoulder. "What will we do in California?" she asked. "Sacramento is growing fast, plenty of opportunity for a skilled seamstress." He wrapped his arm around her. "As for me, I've saved enough to buy a small place outside the city. Been thinking about horse breeding instead of driving cattle, more stable life." Bella smiled at the unintentional pun. "A stable life sounds nice." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. After a while, Hayes spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I know this isn't how you planned things. I know we're still practically strangers." Bella considered this. "Are we?" "I feel like I've known you longer than a few days." "Maybe some people just fit together," he suggested, "without needing all the usual time." "Maybe," she agreed. "Or maybe extraordinary circumstances speed things along." Hayes turned to face her directly. "I want to be clear about something, Bella. I'm not expecting anything from you once we reach California. If you want to establish yourself independently there, I'll help you do that. This doesn't have to be." He gestured between them, struggling for words. "What if I want it to be?" Bella asked quietly. The question hung in the night air. Hayes's eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. "I've spent 2 years in Genoa," she continued, "building a life on my own terms. I know what independence feels like, what it costs, what it's worth. I'm not looking to surrender that for security or convenience." She took his hand in hers. "But there's a difference between dependence and partnership." Hayes nodded slowly. "Partnership," he repeated as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that. So do I." Bella leaned forward and kissed him again, feeling him respond with a restrained passion that sent heat coursing through her despite her injuries. They arrived in Sacramento 2 weeks later, tired and dusty from the trail, but filled with anticipation for their new beginning. The city bustled with commerce and opportunity, the gold rush years having transformed it from a small settlement into a thriving trade center. True to his word, Hayes found Bella a small storefront with living quarters above it, using some of his savings to secure the first month's rent. The space was larger than her shop in Genoa, with better light and a prime location near other respectable businesses. "It's perfect," she breathed, surveying the empty room that would soon become her new shop. "But Hayes, your savings are meant to be used," he finished for her. "Besides, I consider it an investment. You'll make it back tenfold once Sacramento's fine ladies discover your talents." He was right. Within weeks of opening her doors, Bella's skills with a needle had attracted attention. Her designs combined Eastern sophistication with practical Western sensibility, and she soon had more orders than she could fulfill alone. She hired 2 young women as apprentices, one a Chinese immigrant named Lin, who had an extraordinary eye for embroidery. The other, a former saloon girl named Meg, who proved to have natural talent with fabrics. Hayes, meanwhile, purchased a modest property 10 miles outside the city, 20 acres with a small house, barn, and corral. He began acquiring quality horses, building on his knowledge from years of cattle driving to develop a reputation for well-trained, reliable stock. They maintained separate residences, Hayes at his farm and Bella above her shop, but the arrangement was more practical than permanent. They spent most evenings together, alternating between the city and country depending on their work demands. 6 months after arriving in Sacramento, Hayes entered Bella's shop just before closing time, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He waited until her apprentices had left before producing a small wooden box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks," he admitted, turning the box in his hands. "Waiting for the right moment." Bella's heart quickened. "And is this the right moment? As good as any," he said with a half-smile. "I'm not one for grand gestures." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "This was my mother's," he explained. "The only family heirloom I have left." Bella looked from the ring to his face, seeing the vulnerability there so different from the man who had confidently faced down a sheriff to save her. "I'm not asking you to give up anything," Hayes continued. "Your shop, your independence, those are part of who you are, part of why I—" He paused, then finished simply, "part of why I love you." It was the first time he had said those words directly, though his actions had been speaking them for months. "I'm asking for partnership," he continued. "In every sense, a life built together, decisions made together." He took a deep breath. "Bella Foster, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. "When you carried me away that day, I never imagined where the path would lead." "Neither did I," he admitted, "but I've never been more grateful for any journey." "Yes," she said, holding out her hand. "Yes, I'll marry you, Hayes Young." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger as if it had been made for her. When he kissed her, there was no restraint, only the promise of a future neither of them had dared hope for 6 months earlier. They married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by their new friends and colleagues. Bella wore a gown of her own creation, ivory satin with delicate lace she'd spent weeks perfecting. Hayes, uncomfortable in formal attire, nevertheless cut a handsome figure in a new suit. The scars on Bella's back had healed to faint lines, visible only to Hayes in their most intimate moments. Similarly, the furrow on his arm had faded to a silver mark that he bore without complaint. Physical reminders of where their story began, but not what defined them. They decided to make their home at Hayes's farm, with Bella maintaining her shop in the city. She traveled back and forth 3 days a week, leaving the business in her apprentices' capable hands the other days. It was an unconventional arrangement for 1870, but it suited them perfectly. Their first year of marriage brought both challenges and joys. Hayes's horse breeding business grew steadily, his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spreading throughout the region. Bella's shop flourished, expanding to include ready-made garments in addition to custom work. When Bella discovered she was expecting a child the following spring, they faced their first major decision as partners. She was determined not to abandon the business she had built, yet concerned about managing both motherhood and her professional life. "We'll adapt," Hayes assured her one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Your apprentices are nearly skilled enough to manage without you for a few months." "And after those months?" Bella asked, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Hayes covered her hand with his. "Then we'll figure that out too. Maybe we add a nursery to the shop. Maybe I take the baby with me sometimes when I'm working with the gentler horses. Whatever works for us." His confidence calmed her fears. This was why partnership mattered, facing the unknown together, finding solutions that honored both their needs. Their son, James Hayes Young, was born the following winter, a healthy, robust boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Contrary to Bella's fears, motherhood enhanced rather than diminished her creativity. She designed an innovative line of practical yet elegant maternity garments that became her most profitable venture yet. As little James grew from infant to toddler, Hayes and Bella settled into a rhythm that allowed them both to pursue their passions while raising their son. The farm expanded to 30 acres, then 40, with a larger house built to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. 3 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named for both Hayes's sister and Bella's mother. Their family felt complete, a precious gift neither had expected to find after the tragedies and disappointments of their earlier lives. On the 5th anniversary of their departure from Genoa, Hayes brought home a newspaper from their former town. Bella hesitated before opening it, the memories of that day in the town square still capable of chilling her despite the years and distance. "I thought you'd want to see this," Hayes said, pointing to a small article on the 3rd page. The headline read, "Former Sheriff Wilson Convicted of Corruption." The brief text described how the sheriff and Amos Porter had been engaged in systematic exploitation of the town's legal system, using trumped-up charges to acquire property and silence opponents. Their scheme had finally collapsed when they attempted the same tactics with a visiting judge's nephew. Bella set the paper aside, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and relief. "I never expected justice." "Neither did I," Hayes admitted, "but it seems to have found them anyway." They rarely spoke of Genoa after that day. The past had shaped them, brought them together, but it did not define their future. That they were creating day by day, choice by choice, building a life richer and more fulfilling than either had imagined possible. 10 years after leaving Nevada territory, Bella's designs were featured in fashion magazines as far away as New York. Hayes's horse farm had become one of the most respected in California, known for breeding animals that combined beauty with practicality, much like Bella's creations. Their children grew strong and confident, benefiting from parents who modeled both individual passion and mutual respect. James showed his father's affinity for horses and the outdoors, while Sarah revealed early talent with needle and thread, often sitting beside her mother in the workroom Bella had added to their home. On a warm spring evening, Hayes found Bella on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his as naturally as breathing. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" he asked, following her gaze to where James was showing Sarah how to approach one of the gentler mares. "Sometimes," she admitted. "If you hadn't been in Genoa that day, if you hadn't intervened." Hayes squeezed her hand. "I've thought about it too. About all the circumstances that had to align for us to be here now." "Do you believe in fate?" Bella asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I believe in choices," he replied after a moment's thought. "Small ones that lead to bigger ones. I chose to come to Genoa." "You chose to stand by your principles even when it cost you. I chose to step forward that day in the square." He looked down at their intertwined fingers, at the gold band that still shone on her hand. "And every day since, we've chosen each other." Bella smiled, watching their children laugh in the golden evening light. "The best choice I ever made." "Mine too," Hayes agreed, drawing her closer. They had come so far from that brutal day in Genoa's town square, a journey measured not just in miles but in healing, growth, and love. The scars remained, physical and otherwise, but they had faded with time and care, becoming part of their shared story rather than wounds that defined them. What had begun as an act of courage and compassion had blossomed into a life. Neither could have foreseen a true partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support. From the darkest moment of Bella's life had emerged her greatest joy: a family, a purpose, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing year. As the sun set on their California homestead, painting the sky in the same colors that had witnessed the beginning of their journey together, Hayes and Bella Young embraced the future they had built, one choice, one day, one moment at a time.